that doesn't actually resonate within the majority of society. For too long, we've been actually harming the art industry with public funding. And for too long, we've been stifling social progression. The resolution before the House today is this House will stop state funding for the arts. Now, we feel inside government we have two things to prove to you in order to win this round. First off, we have to prove how it is not the government's responsibility to fund art, and two, we have to prove how funding the art industry is harmful for its growth and progression. Okay? So, before I get into my two constructive points of analysis for slide government, I'm going to get into one. So, we define the arts, things like art galleries, theaters, visual, musical, ensembles and whatnot. We define the House as Western liberal democracies. These are all subsidies and funds to preserve and maintain art in society, but we should stop them, and we should let the art do the talking themselves. Because the art is actually valued in society. If society values the art, so that is what is more important. So, on to my two constructive points of analysis. The first one is about let die, you think die. Right? So, like, when we feel outside the house, you have to take a step back. And by actually subsidizing things, you're actually depicting the fact that it needs that help, right? You're depicting the fact in society that art is dying, and that's why we need to help art. You see, that's something that's bad. The government's help, the government clearly helps art, because right now it's not making any money. Why? Because, thank you. Because the government funding is needed, because clearly there's a very low demand for it in society. Right? So I show that they value some time periods, some types of art more than others. If you look, look at the example of modern day rap, and like Beethoven. And they're clearly the rap industry is thriving right now because society has value for it, right? So there's this distinct difference between the two. And if society actually values something, that society will prop it up, right? We should respect and try not to impose what we think is valuable to society on society. So thank you. So that's an interesting point. If society has deemed something that is appropriate, that's what we tell, if society has deemed that, then it's not our burden to prove otherwise, right? We don't go subsidizing Drake or like Jay-Z videos because, society values and society can help them stand for themselves. But it's the same thing. Society really values it, they'll be able to pump it on as well. We should have the ability to recognize when society has shifted from one period to another and move with that shift. So that we shouldn't be living in the past, Mr. Speaker. We should let that progression occur because that's what society wants. If something is valued, society will preserve it. Thank you to the example of Latin. Latin is a dying language and we let it die, Mr. Speaker. Right? Very few people spoke Latin and we let it die. There was no preservation efforts. We shouldn't stagnate culture. We should let society change. Because that stuff clearly is representative of our modern day culture. Yeah.
But don't you believe there are parts of art that are exactly in the national culture?
Okay, so it's fun. So the society is that actual, if the nation actually values culture, actually values the art, then they'll do what it takes to actually keep that art up. And help it stand. The government shouldn't impose their will on society because we think it's important. So here's all this funding. We feel you should value it, right? So as the United States, they really value American art. They will go and put their own. They'll go to the art galleries and visit themselves and get their own money, and clearly show it's actually valuable, right? On to the second point: why is funding disconnected, right? So we feel like when something is state sanctioned, it cannot be termed free expression anymore, right? So someone essentially picks and chooses what goes into the art. I'm giving you the example of art gallery. So the curator, chooses what actually enters the art gallery and what doesn't enter the art gallery. Because that's out of sense what people actually may want and what's actually good. You have one person that chooses all of it, and then the will of the people is gone, right? There's a lot of art, but there's only so many spots in the art gallery. So it's unjust. And because we will give legitimacy to certain pieces and not others, so that is bad. And that, thank you. We also feel that because one man thinks art is good enough in a museum, because it came from one specific artist that is let's say reputable, that we're giving that priority. Let's say the man on the street corner who's an artist because he does it because he loves it, and his art is amazing, but he doesn't get that priority in the art gallery. Yeah.
What message do we send to the young people that want to become artists? Should they become only rappers and think that society wants?
No, not at all. So if you really want to if you don't subsidize rap, people can still become rappers. So just because you subsidize something doesn't mean you can't. Get involved with it. We don't subsidize a lot of things. They don't subsidize actors, people still become actors. There's nothing against it at all. If you're really passionate about something and you really have that drive, you say go for it. We're just saying you don't have to use the public's money to help you with your art. So that if you have that drive, then you should be able to build that rapport by yourself, as you do in every other industry, right? So, the second thing about why funding is detrimental is that it impedes social purpose. So, this is further social change and it's like creativity, but the government doesn't support all types of art, so it shouldn't support any. Like, for example, if the government is running, I'll give you the example, there's the Ontario Art Gallery in Canada, right? And it's funded by the government. So that's actually something that's bad, because now if you have something that's ideologically opposed to what the government believes, then it's not going to go in the art museum, because that's not fair. Because if you really value the whole idea of art, you should value all types of art, having a biased party actually, running and having control over all of it is detrimental. Because what they're probably going to come up and tell you that we value art, it's so positive on our culture and its influence. You say fine, but still you shouldn't pick and choose and actually just portray one aspect of it. If you feel it's that important, then portray all aspects of it. Don't just stifle it and give one perspective. Thank you. The third thing is that it delegitimizes the art, right? I give you the examples like LGBT. Right? The government never funded their movement, it just picked up because society deemed it as valuable, right? Society decided, what they stood for was important, we're going to back them in it. And it's the same principle here. If society believes that, art is that important, then they'll back it up, right? So we live in a society today where, when they value something, they really value it and they go hard at it, right? Get it right, they go hard at it in North America, for example, right? So, really, it's the same thing. By subsidizing it, we're entrenching the notion that art needs to be saved because people don't care. We're essentially undermining it. And we're saying, because it's not important, we have to help petty little guys, because clearly people don't care, and we just want to preserve it for some reason, right? Clearly there's no demand for it. There's no general demand for it, which is why we're subsidizing it, because if they were, raking in cash, they wouldn't need subsidy, right? So clearly there's no demand for it, but we're still trying to feel it's wrong. So that society really values it, that it would be, that they keep it for themselves, right? So in conclusion, right, art has three main principles, and three main reasons. The first thing being entertainment, right? So you can still get the entertainment from art because you don't need government to subsidize it. And if people are going to, the government needs to subsidize it, clearly shows people don't actually find that entertainment value in the art in the first place, right? The second thing is about social progression. We prove to you how social progression is stifled, and the third thing that art brings is social expression. It's self-expression. You don't need art galleries to subsidize for self-expression. You can just go paint in your home or dance, whatever you choose. So the reason that we have the proudest.
I'd like to thank the Prime Minister Anul and call the head of the opposition back.
So thank you, Mr. Speaker. We think on the side opposition that this debate should be about how the state really manages things, and if the state does not fulfill anymore this kind of thing, what will happen with the private guys that will invest furthermore in the art domain? We think that three proposition must prove to us that there is a clear advantage for the art per se in the moment in which the private will be the only one that will further invest in art. So there are three big points that they should prove us today in order to win. Firstly, that there cannot be a coherent stance in the moment in which both the state and the private companies work in this domain and invest together. Secondly, that the private will maximize their effect and be more important in the art domain in the moment in which the state stops funding. And thirdly, that the art will per se benefit from the fact that the state isn't an actor anymore. We believe that today, the real problem is that the private can already invest in everything that they can. Today, the private can invest in classical music, can invest in rap concerts, and the fact that we see today is that in 99% of the cases, the private companies really tend to choose to invest in Nicki Minaj and Justin Bieber concerts. No, thank you. We believe that this is an important problem. What we see is that the diversity and the quality of the art decreases in the moment in which the private invests. Because privates are an industry. Privates are an industry that seeks profit, and we believe that this is wrong. Let's look at what happens in the moment in which the state funds something, because the state fundamentally funds things like classical music concerts. The attendance on this concert is amazing. There are huge crowds. What we see is that people do not go to private funded concerts because the privates do not want to invest in this kind of concert, but in the moment in which the state invests in this kind of concert, the people go there.
No, sir. The reason like private companies choose to invest in like Jay-Z and not like Beethoven concerts is because the majority of people want to go see Jay-Z. The majority of people don't want to go see classical music.
No, the reason why this private invest in this is the fact that if the classical music may be profitable, but Jay-Z is more profitable. And even if the crowd would want classical music, they would want even more, even 1% more Jay-Z, and that's the moment in which the private only seek profit, and some part of the art will decrease. Now, in our position, we will have two big points today. I'm going to talk about the role of the state in art, while my colleagues will furthermore develop our case talking about the impact on the future. Firstly, let's look at what they said, and I'm going to talk about quality and diversity. As I stated before, quality and diversity will decrease because the privates will be only interested in some things. Their big point was that of the choice of the majority. What we say is that not the majority will choose, but the profit that they obtain. The profit will be the one that will guide private. And as I stated in my POI, furthermore, generations will tend to become only the things that are okay in the present day. Kids will want to become rappers, kids won't want to become classical music singers because that's not profitable. This is not very okay at the level of developing art, and we believe that's not okay. Secondly, we believe that what will happen to sculpture, what will happen to painting, because the majority of the society isn't interested in sculpture, but there is a part of the society that really wants it, and sculpture and painting are an important part of the society. They're an important part, and we must preserve all the part of society that form our culture, because the state identifies itself with its culture. Now, what we say is about the local culture. What will happen with the local culture in the moment in which the state does not cooperate with the local authorities to fund this form of art? The province will be never interested in promoting local traditions, and local traditions combined are the ones that form what really means art. That's what we say, that in the moment in which only the private are in the scene, the majority of the people will never choose to promote their local integrity. And we believe local integrity is important because on the level of the future, it's what describes you, and you must embrace it. Now, secondly, we believe that art is extremely important for the society. Let's look at the period in the history in which the state invested the most in art. We'll talk about the Renaissance. That was the moment in which the people didn't really want art, that the art that was given in that day. But the state, like in the Florence government and things like that, so we should fund this. And what happened was that art developed in a large amount. It became better and better. And the message that the state sent is that we promote creativity. What were the collateral advantages? The collateral advantages were that all the other fields that have creativity developed. Things like science progressed along art. This is what happened in the moment in which the state provides important funding for art. Because all these things are interconnected. All things are based on creativity, and in the moment in which the private only invests in what is needed today, we will remain in a society that is only based on today and is not in the future. Now, I'm going to talk about the role of the state and why it is so important. We believe that the role of the state is to sustain culture. Why? Because firstly of the nationalist theme, because France is Louvre, because Germany is Wagner. We believe that in the moment in which you refuse to identify yourself with the history, and you refuse to tell to your people that the history is an important part of yourself, that's the moment in which you are not anymore a responsible state that wants to develop further the state. Secondly, we believe that we need to promote national identity. Why? Because the majority of the countries have interconnected cultures with other countries. We believe that in the moment in which the state publicly funds this, they tell to the people, this is you, and you should embrace yourself, because our differences and our things that make us the same with other countries and with ourselves will make us to become a more important society, and will furthermore go on, because this is what the state should do. Furthermore, we believe that in the moment in which the state provide this funding, they provide a basic general knowledge. And a general knowledge is extremely important because the role of the state is to make its citizens more responsible. It's to make its citizens give better responses and be better informed. And the moment in which we publish this fund is the moment in which we tell the people that that art is important because it sends a message. And the people understand the message and they relate it with other domains. And that's the moment in which people become better informed. Yeah.
Why does government see a responsibility to impose what they feel is what people represent on them?
Well, the real part is that in every situation, someone will impose something. The private will impose something, and the state will impose something. What we say is that the private will always impose what makes them, what is profitable, and we will remain with rappers and rappers and rappers in the future, and things like that. The state will always provide all sorts of entertainment, because the state also funds drug concerts. The state funds everything, but it also funds your basic fundamental culture. That's the big difference. It's not a thing of choice, it's a thing of diversity and quality. And lastly, as I stated in my tier 1, we want to promote art in the future. We want to make sure that the role of the state, that to promote further the development of the state, is fulfilled. And as I stated, the single method in which you can do this is to send a message that art is important. And in the moment in which you don't fund it, you tell everybody that art is not important, and people will be discouraged from becoming artists. Now, at the end of the day, the proposition must prove us some basic things. Why the privates won't impose their choice, because that's what happens when they want profit. Secondly, why the state and the private cannot work together. The state imposing what they want and the private what they want, so everything is fine with this. And thirdly, they should prove us why all these things will benefit our first state. Thank you, and I beg your vote.
Okay, I'd like to thank the leader of the opposition and to call the Prime Minister Rahman.
Mr. Speaker, side opposition today kind of stands to this idea that it's government's duty to keep art alive. That if there's a marginal percentage of people who are willing to see an opera concert, then somehow it's still vital to society. Somehow it still has actually more merit than the art, the music, and that everyone else wants to listen to, and therefore it's our role as government to support. Okay, I'm going to be doing a couple things for you today. Firstly, I'm going to be rebuilding and refuting what we heard coming from that opposition. And then I'm going to be moving into my unconstructive case, like why privatization is better. I'm going to be taking down this idea that the private sector is going to take away the diversity of art. Now, before I get into that, right, I think that we need to make a very clear distinction here, right? We failed to hear this from the side opposition, and I beg them to do so in their next speech. We would like to hear some analysis as to why opera and rap are not parallel, right? Because if you take it down to its fundamentals, regardless, it's just notes on a page, right? Because the art form continues to remain the same. Just because we have made this distinction within government art galleries that opera is classical, opera existed 200 years ago, therefore opera is more important than rap. We should oppose this idea. We should oppose this idea that we should stagnate. We think that it's fundamentally important to recognize that art is art, right? Art is using a creative medium to express yourself. We think the modern day forms of art, we think that things like movies, we think that things like modern day music hold just as much weight as things in the classical time. But what we see is happening is society is progressing forward, right? We see that if you look at any time in history, we see there was the classical period, the Renaissance period, and the Romantic period, and the Baroque period, and these were all bouncing off one another because people said, enough with the Baroque period. We don't like this anymore. We as a society no longer stand for it, and we moved on to something better, Mr. Speaker. Why are you still supporting things that society, we grew from it, right? We moved onward, and we don't think that it's fundamentally the decision of the government to decide if classical is good art, and rap holds no merit. And what my partner said, I think, is fundamental to our case, right? If we're not subsidizing every single form of art, then the government should support none, and we should allow them to fight it out. Alright, so let's move into some refutation of what they said, right? So first is argument about the role of the state art. So we heard quality and diversity was lost because what happens to art painting, right? So we think that this idea that only mega corporations are going to take over art. I'll really be getting into my constructive point, but I'll go through it quick, right? But we see what happens if you remove this government funding is you allow the small fish to prosper, right? We allow like an artist who creates art, who puts it in his own art gallery to sell. If people buy it, he makes some capital, he continues to make art, more people continue to buy it. And so it's the art that becomes prominent in society, it's the art that society wants to see, and not the art that some art director somewhere said, oh, I think this is good art because of my 10 art degrees, right? We don't think that like it's okay for one person to make the decision that this is good art and this is bad art, because the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, there is no objective way to judge art. We said the only way to judge what is good and bad art is what society in the now supports, what people in the modern day see as a reflection of the social norms, what people see in society right now as like what's pushing them forward, what movements people support. We think that that's what needs to become prominent in society. We don't think there's any need to support a movement that no one's getting behind, right? Okay, then we have the second point about like the importance of society, and there are several subpoints to this, so I'll go through them one at a time. So first, they said like one of there's most funding for art, the Renaissance period, right? Like the most art developed then, which for this creativity. But Mr. Speaker, we see that the fundamental flaw of what they're saying is that in the Renaissance period, it wasn't like government funded. Affluent people who like had the money and the knowledge to consider art because they weren't currently starving, took the time to consider art. And when a lot of affluent people stood behind this one idea and this one artist, we see that that's when it became preserved in society. And it wasn't a government funding. It wasn't like the one king said, Van Gogh is good, so all of you have to like Van Gogh. No, that's not what happened. A lot of affluent people supported a lot of artists they liked. You know, they contracted them to paint for them. And so if these artists became apparent within the Renaissance period, these artists gained like, importance within the current society then. But we see that like this is actually supporting privatization, right? That's what happened. Affluent people chose to support it. They chose to stand behind individuals, Mr. Speaker, not the government. Right, secondly, we heard about like history is a vital part of society. We need to support that government, we need to keep the diversity of the past alive. Like Mr. Speaker, we did like two responses to this, right? They failed to show us why like the historical art has any more value than modern art, so we don't think that there's any taking one sec. We don't think there's any additional merit to be had. We don't think we need to keep alive like something that like no one in society wants to see, and if they're not willing to pay for it, we don't think that's like they care. Yeah.
Exactly, that's what we say, that they are both important and we should preserve it as a basically
okay. Alright, well let's consider democratic principles, right? If the masses don't support it, if the majority of people in a democratic nation don't want to see it, if you're not willing to pay, you know, $20 extra to go to a private art gallery as opposed to an art gallery that's subsidized and see art from the Renaissance period, Mr. Speaker, unfortunately people don't care. So what that it's important in history, we don't think that's a reason that the government should have to subsidize it. We fail to see this link in their case until they prove that their argument doesn't stand. Alright, third subpoint, right? The state should support art culture. Okay, we think there's just like something fundamentally wrong, like the government dictating like who you are and who you like what represents you. We think that the way that society shows what they want to be represented by is that they support it in the private sector. And on that note, let's move into the private sector, right? Why privatization is better? So here's the process of art getting into a private art gallery. An artist paints the art, right? Then they put it for sale in some small art gallery. People buy it, the artist makes money, the artist continues to paint, so people continue to buy it. And the day that people stop buying it is the day that society has moved forward. And we said this allows for social progression, because this is what actually promotes creativity, this is what promotes innovation, this is what promotes like the entire idea and sector of art to stay on point with society, to stay current as opposed to getting outdated. The process within like a governmentally funded art gallery is some artist paints something and some official says, okay, well this is good, so let's legitimize this, right? So what we see, the problem with this is that like there is no constant definition of good art, right? There is no objective way to say this is good and this is bad, which is why we need to allow it to be stayed in the private sector, which is why we need to allow the social movement to continue to push forward, as opposed to saying, well, I think this is good because I studied law at Harvard, or art at Harvard 10 years back, and this is what they taught me was good art, right? We see that a lot of movements like stop being relevant after a little bit of time, right? We see that like what my partner talks is extremely relevant here, right? The LGBT movement did not need to be propped up to gain popularity in society. We think this applies to art as well. We think that if people like this, look at this. Art fundamentally reflects a social commentary or an individual's perspective, right? We think that this perspective is reflective of the modern day. And we think that to keep this modern, when people in society stop being interested on your social commentary, when people stop thinking it's applicable to their life, we think that it should stop being considered the most relevant art. We don't think that that's the art that should get a place in art galleries. The art that should get a place in art galleries, the art that the majority of the people like, the majority of the people support, and that the majority of the people think is accurate. social commentary. We don't think that this can be chosen by one individual, because we don't think that there is one perspective. We don't think that, like, there is one correct way to say this is good art. We think that privatization is the only way, because when what we see now, when we have two sectors, if they say private art is like, oh, you like to paint, and art that's in the public government gallery, that's legitimate art. That's artist with a capital A. And we don't think that that's right. We don't think that there should be government giving legitimacy to art chosen by one individual. We think that art that's good should be art that's good because people support it all enough. So what have we talked to you about today, right? We talked to you once about like how if art is dying, Mr. Speaker, let it die. Like unfortunately, no society wants to an opera. Opera isn't reflected in the modern day society. We don't think it continues to hold any merit, unfortunately. Two, why government funding is detrimental, and three, why privatization is better. So for these three reasons, we're very proud to propose this.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. I would like to call the second leader of the opposition.
Well, first of all, what we have heard today from Team Government is that there is no good art or bad art. That is exactly what we want to say. There is no moment in time where we should say, well, that is not such a good type of art because people don't want it. We believe today that it's the state's main duty to preserve all types of art at a basic level, and of course, let the privatization and let the private sector develop them by the needs of the people. But at a basic level, this is our duty, and this is what we're going to sustain today. But let's take it in three main points. First of all, the burden each team has today, and whether it was or not shown, and how each team tries to show it. Secondly, the state's duty and the importance of all types of art. And thirdly, our second argument, and that being the impact on the future if this motion is applied. Let's start from the beginning. We believe today the team government should have brought us a clear advantage. But what they actually said was, oh, privatization would be better because it would be representative. But what they actually meant is that nowadays we actually have private sector, only we have money from the state as well. We don't see why, if we have more money in this domain, there is actually a problem. We don't see how if the state puts in a minimum of funding and sustains everybody and actually maintains the level on every category, we don't see how this actually affects the people, because it's not about a huge funding. It's not about taking money from the health system and so on. It's a proportion of taxes that actually is insignificant to one person, but it actually could make a difference in the future regarding art. And what they actually brought us as a form of the current situation is that the will of the people is not represented. Well, we actually say that by the private sector that nowadays invests, we have such a representativity. We have that one domain developed better than others, and we sustain it. Yes, it's normal for demands to be different from kind to kind. But what we do not see is why would it harm a citizen so bad that we actually keep pottery from a certain area as a specific type of art, and why is this so bad as long as we can actually maintain it and keep it as it is part of our history and our development. But moving on to the state duty and importance, I actually started saying something on this one. But culture is the main factor of the human development, and that is why we believe that its diversity is very important for each human being, and that is why even if yes, sometimes we wanted a Renaissance or modernism or Romanticism and so on, we believe that keeping them all helps us develop. If we study them all, we learn from each one of them. Even if now it's modernism, the next one we don't see why we shouldn't take account of the ones that pass. We don't see why we should actually not sustain a basic level of art in each side. Can you contradict me?
So please explain to me why if you're an opera singer you get government subsidy, but if you're like a rap artist you have to find your own demographic and get your own following.
Well, we say that if you are actually a rap singer and no one can help you, there is no interest, well, the state should help you. The state should help you develop, because we should have we should have a basic development of each type. And if we do not get it from the private, well, that's the moment in which the government should impose itself and should help this trend. And actually, they try to tell us how the natural trend of development will be blocked, but we do not see how the state's involvement would actually change this trend, because the trend is based on the people's needs and on the environment, and we do not see how it actually, if we stop funding opera, well, all people will get into rap, and rap could actually get more funding and get more developed. Because what they actually do, they take money from art and give it nothing. They do not give the private any incentive to be better, and they do not give them any motive to develop themselves. They only take money from these people, and we do not see any benefit from this thing. And we only see that it impacts negatively on the future. And this is my third point today. Because what we see is actually, if you do not develop all types of art, and if you don't keep them at a basic level, what you get is that you will lose them. On the long term, you will lose those types of art. And we are not talking only about great types of art that, well, maybe will get sustained by private, but we're talking about local culture as well. We believe that local culture is very important in the society, but before this, yes, please.
So what about all the art that gets sidestepped because the government doesn't think it's important, even if it might be?
Well, we believe all art is important, and we believe we should keep it all at the basic level as much as we can help it. And moving back to my point about local culture, we believe this is the actual culture that would be most harmed, because nowadays we actually see state funding programs that help these kinds of local culture, because they are disappearing. We see that there is a certain area in each country or each state and everywhere where a local culture exists, from pottery to painting and so on. We see that these types are not so popularized, but are part of our history, are part of our development. They were there at a certain time, and we believe it is very important to know about the future and preserve them as much as we can, so that they will not be lost in time. Not only this, but we see that But we see that if we do not maintain a domain, we will lose it, and we will not have any backup yet.
We cannot agree that it's not the government's responsibility to preserve the culture, it's society, because they're the ones that should be valuing it.
No, we believe that it's the state's duty to protect its citizens. We believe that the citizens don't take always the best choices, and that is why we should keep it at the basic level. We should conserve our history, and it's our duty to make the world as safe enough for the future generations, and leave them something behind, and not lose one of our history projects and so on. That is why we mainly believe that privatization will only harm less known domains that can actually mean something to us. And we believe today that we should not discriminate art, because there is actually no good art or bad art. All art is good, and that is why we must not lose it. We must not lose this money that is actually due. And this would actually not break their standing trend. We see that over in all future, the state has actually encouraged all types of art, and they actually change, they develop, they got in time and so on. That is why we beg you to oppose this motion.
So that brings the deputy leader of the opposition and to call the opposition whip, colleague.
Just came up here and told you that we should start funding all art. They're not arguing for the status quo, Mr. Speaker. They're arguing for something simply impossible. They're arguing that all art is good, and therefore preserved and publicly funded. We just don't have the money for that, Mr. Speaker. We think that that's ridiculous. We think that that doesn't make any sense. And furthermore, I'm going to be getting into two main questions for you so that we think that, for why we think that we've actually won this debate. Okay. So my first question is history important in the assessment of the value of art? And secondly, what are the effects of state funding on art? Okay, so primarily, is history important in the assessment of the value of art? Now, science opposition told you, my partners told you about the fact that, okay, let me start this again. Science opposition told you about the role of the state in art. They told you that quality and diversity are going to diminish, that it's very important to preserve historical artifacts. And they also told you that we need to tell people their culture. We need to tell people what they should value. And we think that the fact that he's banging the desk right now when I say that means he doesn't recognize the fact that when we tell people what they should value, when we impose values on a culture, when we tell you this is the most important part of your culture, not these other things, maybe not the modern parts, maybe not other historical artifacts, when they try to impose values on a culture, we think that's fundamentally wrong. We think that's undemocratic. We think that the people are capable of making the decisions themselves. We think that fundamentally, when you have these kinds of arguments, that in the long term, we may lose like local culture because the citizens don't always want to preserve it, which is what the second speaker told you. We think if people don't want to preserve it, then it's fundamentally not valuable to the society. If the people are not interested in preserving it, then it holds no value or merit. However, we think that generally speaking, people do recognize merit and value in these kinds of artifacts, but they may not necessarily be the same things or the same pieces of art that the government values. And that's what we think is bad. And I'm going to be talking about my second question, so I'll leave that for now.
Why do people go to classical music concerts but the private don't organize this kind of concerts?
Okay, one, there are private sector art galleries that run classical art, that run classical concerts. We think that kind of thing actually does happen. But furthermore, if the private sector tries to organize a concert for classical music and people don't show up and people don't want to come, then it's not inherently valuable to people. People aren't interested. We think that's okay. Side opposition has never justified to you why exactly opera is more valuable than something like rap music. They've never told you why Picasso is more valuable than the modern art we see. They've never told you these things. They never showed any analysis on this point. That's why we think that we win the point of whether or not history is important in the assessment of the value of art, because we think fundamentally it's the people's opinions on art that dictate whether or not it should be preserved, because we find that fundamentally the purposes of art, I'll take you in a moment, the purposes of art show, like as my partners told you, the idea that it's like self-expression, it's social change. We think that these kinds of things, if people recognize the value inherently in that's okay, they will preserve it. If there is no value, it will not be preserved.
But don't you think it would be better that the will of the people show us only what domain should be developed, not preserved?
Okay, so what you're saying is the will of the people show us what domains should be developed but not preserved. Okay, this POI doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Essentially, we think that fundamentally the will of the people shows what kinds of things that people are interested in, what kinds of things people want to be preserved, what kinds of things people find inherently valuable to their culture. My partners told you that we think there are essentially three purposes that art serves. We think that one, art is a form of self-expression. We think that therefore doesn't require galleries and that kind of thing. Then we told you we think art is a form of entertainment. So we think that fundamentally, if people would prefer to go to the movies than go to an opera, that's fine, Mr. Speaker. We think that the movies fulfill this purpose of art just as well, or better for some people than opera, and that's okay. And then thirdly, we think that art is a form of social change, art is a form of social commentary. We think that if people find the social commentary compelling, then they will be interested in preserving it. If they don't, they won't, and that's okay. Side opposition needs to show us why every single piece of art needs to be preserved. We think that that's unrealistic. Okay, let's get to my second question. What are the effects of state funding on art? Okay, so side opposition told you that the effects of state funding on art are really good. That they told you that privatization and the status quo exist alongside public funding. What's so bad about that? We find, Mr. Speaker, when the government invests money into an art gallery, the government is saying these are the kinds of pieces of art that we want to preserve. The government is legitimizing some pieces of art, which in turn delegitimizes other kinds of art. We find that fundamentally, We find all art equal. We think that society can decide what kinds of art should be preserved and shouldn't be preserved. We think that the public sector undermines the private sector, Mr. Speaker. My partners talked to you about why privatization works. Why exactly, when we have people who run an art gallery, why the society who comes in and purchases the pieces of art that are displayed there, why that shows why these pieces of art are inherently valuable? The only response to this we heard is essentially like what I said before, that the state helps fund private galleries. We think that fundamentally, any perspective stands a chance in the private sector. We think that any kind of art stands a chance because people are willing to try say, maybe people will like this, maybe people will buy this. We think even when an artist personally sells their art on the sidewalk, we think that that's the private sector, that's more inherently valuable than the public sector, because no one is saying, look, your kind of art is not legitimate, you're not an artist with a capital A, you don't belong in the government-funded art gallery. We think that fundamentally, all art should be decided upon based on whether people like it, whether people find it compelling. We think that these are the kinds of things that legitimize art, not necessarily the governmental perspective, especially when we're talking about art that represents some kind of social commentary. Because we find that, Mr. Speaker, when the government dictates what kinds of social commentary are and aren't acceptable, we're not living in the kind of world we want to be living in anymore, Mr. Speaker. We think that fundamentally, it's far better for us to be able to decide what kinds of things are important and what are not. Okay, so they told you, they had this one point about how in the long term, these pieces of art are very important to society, how we're going to lose local culture and history and these kinds of things. And we think that fundamentally, Mr. Speaker, we think people generally are interested in preserving their local culture. That's why people do a lot of these activities preserving their local culture. It's not just that museums keep pieces, right? But furthermore, Mr. Speaker, we think that local culture no longer, if people are not interested in preserving it, that's fine. My partners talked to you about the fact that culture is not stagnant, that the culture can evolve, and that's okay. We think that fundamentally, unless my opposition can prove to you that culture needs to have these pieces of art to stay alive, we think that that's not true. Unless I can prove that to you, we think that we win this side of the debate. Because, Mr. Speaker, when you have a culture that is consistently progressing, that is okay with throwing out pieces of its culture it's no longer interested in an effort to make more and to progress further, we think that's a good thing, Mr. Speaker. Okay, so what did I talk to you about today? I told you my first question, whether or not history is important to the assessment of the value of art, and Mr. Speaker, we don't think it is. We think that all art has inherent merit, and we think that it should be judged based on whether or not it fulfills some social criteria, and therefore project proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker, and for the opposition to it, for that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The problem with this match is that we have two teams that tackle the motion in different ways. We tackle the motion in the way that has both the private sector and the state funding. That is our opposition side. That is what we have in our part of the house. The problem with the proposition side of today is that they have talks about privatization and other things like that. Those things do not belong in this match as long as one side of the house already has private in it, already has private funding in it. The thing that they are missing is that telling us how beneficial private funding is, they are doing part of our job. Their job, their burden is to show us an exact harm of state plus private investment, not only state investment, because it's a debate about state versus private investment. This is a debate between state plus private versus only private. Can you deny that?
I'm sorry, did you listen to the part of my speech where I explained that the public sector undermines the private sector?
I will get there in a minute. Thank you very much. So basically, they had to show us a harm. It was their burden to show us that state funding in itself is harmful for art. And they tried that through two main ideas. Their first one was that it's not the responsibility of the state, and the second one is that it is harmful. Well, let's see how they back that up. They said that it's not the responsibility of the state because, one, funding something means that it's dying, so it needs public funding, which is logically false and untrue, because what they mean here is that funding does not mean that you think it's dying, it only means that you value it and you want to preserve it through funding. And moreover, it's kind of interesting that you're facing a team from Canada in this match, because we think that saying that public funding is thinking that something is dying is especially wrong coming from Canada, because we have the example of public health care. As long as public health care is funded by the state, how can you say that the state funds things that they think are in a wrong place or are dying? The fact that you fund something means that you value it, not that you think that it needs help because it's dying. Moreover, no, thank you. Moreover, their argument was that if the nation values it, if the citizens of a country value something, then they will fund it, they will back it up. Well, I will quote from the third proposition speaker. She said, "We cannot impose values on the people. That is wrong. That is not okay." Well, that's exactly why, as long as you have only private funding, because privates only seek making profit out of the car, we are basically imposing values. People can cherish things, but they cannot, sometimes they aren't able to fund it wholly because of hype, because of the private sector that is more influenced than the state and can have larger meetings and create hype for their kind of art. Just because, no thank you. Just because some people cherish something, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have a concert to attend, because maybe the state cannot fund so many concerts for every single art category. That may be true, but we need to preserve them at the basic level. It is logically false, and it's a logical flaw to say that the nation values it, so it will fund it. It doesn't work that way because of hype and because of the private influence, which is larger than the state influence. No, thank you. So basically, that's why the first idea of the responsibility of the state does not stand. Moreover, let's see the main harm that they showed us in this debate. They said that people will not be able to choose what to see because of the private, because the private will, because the state right now chooses what to have in our gallery. Well, when you say that, you have to prove first that the private ask the people, that the private cherish the opinion of the people, and that the people will see what they want to see in private presentation. We think that it is more likely for state-funded art galleries to be in the people's likeness. Yeah.
If you want to do a property derived from what society wants, if they don't get what society wants, they'll have to make profit, and they will get society what they want in the private sector.
You see, that's what you're missing, because it's directly proportional. If the society wants something more than something else, it means that you should develop that one thing. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't preserve the thing that is less wanted. Just because you want something more means that the private sector will invest in it because it's more profitable, but doesn't mean that the state shouldn't preserve the other thing because it's still wanted. So this is where I will talk about why it's extremely important to have both modern art and classical art. The fact that the proposition team has a debate between modern art versus classical art means that they do not understand this debate. It is not a dying art. No, not one of these is dying, and we should not have them fight each other. Both are extremely important. Both should be funded, both should be helped. Even though modern art is more profitable, doesn't mean that classical art does not have an impact. And its impact is in our history, because we had periods like the Renaissance period, like every period, and they were already all named. It basically means that they are part of us, they are part of human history, and we need to preserve it. Just by going forward, we shouldn't forget the things that brought us here, where we are right now. So we need to preserve our values, our local values, our worldwide values. So this will lead me to the last point of my speech, which will be the impact both teams had on two major areas. First, First, on the art industry, and secondly, on the society. On the art industry, we think that we have the edge because we've proven you that we will have more diverse art, and that is essential. We need to have every kind of art in our museums. We need to have both private funding and state funding, and this is essential because only through both of these mechanisms we will be able to preserve it. And we think that the impact on the art industry is superior from our part of the house because of this diversity and quantity. Moreover, we believe that quality will be positively impacted by us because the state does not seek profit. That means that the state will not sell garbage art. The privates may do so because it may be profitable. Moreover, let's see the impact on the society. And what I want to say here is that art is essential for all of us. From Olomouc to Toronto to Timisoara. Everyone has art. Everyone is influenced by art. Art is a big vital point of our life. That basically means that we should not only focus on one type of art, and that is modern art, and that is what the government team proposes today. We should focus on everything, because the impact every kind of art and every sector of the art has on human beings is extremely important and should be preserved. And because of all these, please approach.
I'd like to thank the speaker and further invite speaker from side opposition class.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We simply asked the proposition to show us a clear advantage of why the private are better than private plus state. The only thing that we heard was rhetoric. We did not hear content of simple mechanisms to show us why the state is so bad. Why the state is such a bad actor that influences the decisions of the population, the decisions of the private, and why it influences so negative the private. Now, let's look at what art really is. Because art is not just a simple painting, just a simple song. Art is what constitutes culture. And culture is what represents the basic foundation of a state. Because Italy is Da Vinci's Italy. England is Shakespeare's England. That's why in the moment in which we talk about art, we talk about the state. And in the moment in which the state is made of art, that's the moment in which we consider that the state has the duty to preserve not only art, but as we have proven on all the third speeches itself. Because art, it is the state. Now, the only thing that in proposition told us today was the fact that nowadays people want different things. What we told you was that those different things are okay. That's why we have the private sector. That's why Justin Bieber concerts exist. What we say is that sometimes classical music concerts do not exist because the private are not interested in this kind of concerts. What we see, that's the moment in which the state goes and organizes this concert. Furthermore, we see that people go to those classical music concerts. That means that at least a minority, a significant minority of the state wants this kind of concert. And let's look at the two burdens today. They want to provide the majority with what they want. What do? Is to provide the majority with what they want. That's what the private sector does, but also provide the minority with what they want. That's why, at the end of the day, they may be satisfying 99.9 people in the society, but we're satisfying them all. That's why, at the end of the day, we consider that private plus state is more important than just the private. And now, let's look at really what happens to art. Because what we said in all of our speeches was that we want quality and diversity. Because it's clearly that the industry of the private companies only seeks profit. What we see is, as I proved in my speech, that culture must be preserved. Because maybe nowadays people want trap, but as we've seen in history, currents become retro, and maybe today, maybe tomorrow, we will want the art from Renaissance. They did not respond, and they did not tackle the fact that tomorrow is uncertain. We do not know what tomorrow really means, and the only thing that they propose is to make today tomorrow, and make the future the present, forgetting about all the other things that we made. What we also said is that we believe in the future, and that we must make all the kids and all the people that want to become artists realize in the moment in which the state provides you with some funding if you need it, that's the moment in which they say, art is important. If you want to become an artist, you can become. If you want to become a rapper, well, there are rap concerts that are funded by the state. Not so many because private do it more well. That's fine. But if you want to become a rapper, you can. If you want to play the violin, you can. That's the basic thing that Team Opposition told you today. So at the end of the day, we have two themes. One that tackles the crux of this debate. The fact that we preserve both and we promote what people want. This is the choice of everyone. This is the choice of your regular Joe, and this is the choice of your art critique. What they said today is that they only want the majority, and the majority is not all the state. We believe in all the citizens. Thank you, and I thank you.
And the speaker to sum up this entire debate, I'd like to call once again on the
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, they came up here and they asked a question. They said that we failed to prove to you how private, just having a sole private industry is worse than having, so it's better than having a private and public. I'm going to prove this to you very quickly before I get and show you how we have proven it. Sorry, before I get into my two main questions, which I feel really summarize this round. So first off, she talks about, right? Barbara came up here and talked about. If you look at the public sector, right? If you have the public and the private, the status quo, the only people in their mind, the only legitimate art is that those big art galleries with public fund, that are public fund, right? You don't see people flocking toward, private, and the people who do the art galleries, they don't go to those small private art galleries, they go to the public art galleries. What happens is that it's essentially like success. So if you have privatization, success is proportional to the following of these artists. And success, like the music industry, the success is deemed on what the people think about the art. So that's more accurate. And that having public and private, you actually, on a pie chart, which you give the example, right? In the private sector, you have different art galleries and you have different followings and whatnot. But if you look at public and private, everything is strategy towards the public. If you look at that's bad, because you only get that one perspective of the public funding. Barbara came up here and talked to you why that's bad. We proved it to you how having that one perspective on art is detrimental because because that's not what art stands for, because that is wrong. Because that's why we proved it to you how private is better than having public and private. So, two questions. Do we have an obligation to save art? So they came up here and talked about how the government should tell people who they are and what they should value. They said that the government has a responsibility to ensure that old culture survives. They talked about the Renaissance, or that example, which is wrong. He talked about how the kids won't become artists. He said that the government won't sell. There's also a contradiction in the case. So that the government, and the third speaker, won't, quote, I quote, won't sell garbage because it won't be profitable. And the second speaker came up here and said, well, all art is good. So that's a contradiction in the case. But furthermore, we will say that in response to a couple of things. First of all, the government is accountable to the people. So if the government spends money that the people don't want them to spend, that's undemocratic. Because the government, how can a democratic government spend tax dollars on something that the taxpayers aren't even willing to spend money on themselves? Because that's what they can fail to address. And the government has a responsibility to override the will of the people for culture. They do not prove that. They just assert it. Right? We talk about how it's society's responsibility to prop these things up if they really value it. Talk about how culture is progressive. Right? So culture is progressive, and that we should be up to date with it, and that it won't keep it living in a passive and accurate representation of our culture today. We also show how private cannot do what the government is doing right now in a better way. How people won't become artists, so Picasso never developed to by having the government propping him up. Right? The second question, is public funding the best way? They're arguing for the status quo. This is both avenues are good, that we haven't proven it's harmful. They brought up the example of healthcare, which is completely different, a whole different ballpark. And so the private just won't profit. So the last one is the most important thing we'll talk about. Private industries do and give services based on what people want, right? Profit is derived from what society demands and wants. So if these companies, and it's not going to be the three companies, major places they think on the picture that they portray. So there's going to be multiple private galleries owned by individual art owners. Profit is derived from what people want. We also say that the status quo doesn't actually have equal representation of all art. We prove to you in our curriculum that's not true. We prove to you how the status quo is really not working because not all art is getting out there. Because people are inclined to go to the public funded art because the government supports it, right? We put privatization allows different perspectives. The public art is one, the private sector is diverse, the private and that they haven't adequately showed to you from the nation how the government has a responsibility to override when the taxpayers feel is necessary and what they want.